See. Okay, so I want to welcome everybody today to our lesson on Megillat Esther on chapter 8. Last time we met was a big review because we had not had class for about a month because of all the Chagim. And so now we're back to the text and we're now going to move forward. We don't have too much longer before we have to make a siyum, and that certainly will be a joyous occasion. So welcome everybody, and we've set our bracha for learning, and we hope and pray that everyone watching who's not here with us is well. And we're going to start reading chapter 8 so we know what we're talking about. And I'm going to ask for a volunteer for someone to read.
Happy to
Dorothy.
read.
Dorothy, would you like to read?
Sure.
Okay.
That same day, King Ahasuerus gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai was invited to come to the king, for Esther had told him how they were related. The king took off his ring with the royal seal on it. He had taken it away from Haman and now gave it to Mordecai. Then Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's property. Again, Esther spoke to the king. She fell down at his feet and cried. She begged him to stop the evil of Haman the Agagite and the plan that he had thought up against the Jews. The king pointed the gold scepter toward Esther, and Esther got up and stood before the king. She said, "If the king wishes, and if he is pleased with me, and if the king thinks that my idea is right, and if he thinks that I am good, let a law be written to bring back those letters that contained the plans of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, in which he wrote the order to destroy the Jews in all the king's countries. For how can I bear to see the terrible thing that will happen to my nation? And how can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "I have given Haman's property to Esther, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he plotted against the Jews. You may write in the king's name whatever you want about the Jews and seal it with the royal ring, but any law that was once written in the king's name and sealed with the royal ring may not be canceled." So the king's secretaries were called at that time on the 23rd day of the third month, which is the month of Sivan. The new law was written exactly as Mordecai said it should be. It was sent to the Jews and to the rulers, the governors and officers of the countries from Hodu to Cush, 127 countries, to each country in its own script, to each nation in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. He wrote the law in the name of the king Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring. He sent out letters by swift messengers on horseback and by riders of fast camels. The letters said that the king had given permission to the Jews of every single city to join together and defend themselves, to destroy, to kill, and to wipe out the entire army, along with their wives and children, of any nation or country that wants to hurt them. And the Jews could take their enemies' property. All this should happen on the same day in all the countries of King Ahasuerus. On the 13th day, of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. The contents of the letter were as follows. This law should be announced in every country for all the nations to know that on that day, the Jews should be ready to take revenge against their enemies. The swift messengers, riders of fast camels, left in a very great hurry by order of the king, and the law was announced in Shushan, the capital. Mordecai left the king wearing blue and white royal clothes with a big gold crown and robes of fine linen and of purple wool. Then the city of Shushan was cheerful and glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. The same thing happened in every country and in every city wherever the king's command and his law reached, that the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. And many from among the nations of the land made believe they were Jews because they had become afraid of the Jews.
Okay. Oh, that's a lot of stuff going on, right? All right. So let's go back to the beginning. This chapter covers the period of time after Haman's death, his hanging by King Ahasuerus, and through the sending out of the decree issued by Mordecai, who now has become King Ahasuerus's number 2 man. He is the official that the king has appointed in Haman's place. And we, if we take a look at, what we'll do first here is we'll take a look at the chapter itself, the text, and then we'll go and look at some of the other things that have happened. So it says that very day, King Ahasuerus gave the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Well, what she does is she passes it on to Mordecai to take over. And now the irony of a lot of what has gone on in the whole text, you know, there's so many things that have gone on that we go, oh my goodness, that's like such the hand of God working at such an amazing pace of this happening and that happening, and things becoming afuch, which means like upside down or turned around. In Hebrew, it's quite interesting because here was the estate that Haman lived in, placed a gallows to hang Mordecai, and now who's running the estate? Mordecai. So, and Haman has been killed on the gallows, not Mordecai. So that right there is tremendous irony that we find in the story, and certainly the hand of God. So then we take a look at the text, and we find the king slipped off his signet ring. Of course, he had taken it away from Haman, and he now gives it to Mordecai on the recommendation of Esther. Interestingly enough, here we go, Esther has really taken over as the main character in the story. She is doing quite a lot, manipulating and moving all the players into the position that God needs her to do so that the Jews will be saved. But we find that she has not only taken over as the main character, but she replaces Mordecai in the one who's running the show. Before she becomes queen, and at the beginning of her being queen in the palace, she is being told what to do, what not to do, how to do it, when to do it by Mordecai. He instructs her on not to tell her identity, to be careful in the palace, not to let anyone know that she's Jewish, not to reveal her identity. And then he tells her, now you must reveal your identity and go to the king and plead for the Jews. So he now in some ways takes a second position to even Esther. So he's number two man to the king, and he seems to take a back seat to Esther at the moment, who has now told the king of her relationship with Mordecai the Jew. And so now the king understands that she had told the king about Mordecai saving the king. Remember when there was a plot by Bigtan and Teresh to poison the king, to kill the king. So we see that she not only intervenes and tells the king exactly who Mordecai is, but how she's related. And now she would like to have Mordecai take over the estate and manage that for her. And the king feels that anyone who has done as much for the king as Mordecai has, certain and for the queen, certainly deserves to be his number two person. And he slips off the ring and hands it to Mordecai. And he becomes the number two guy. Now, in between, it seems a little disconnected in some of the paragraphs here, if we take a look at them in a literary sense. First, we have the fact that that Haman, on that day that Haman is killed, the estate is given to Queen Esther. We learn about Mordecai, and now there's a momentary stop about the situation with Mordecai. And in Pasuk 3, we find that Esther has to go back to the king. Why does she have to go back to the king? Because her job is not finished. She has not completely saved the Jews. She's saved herself in the eyes of the king, and the enemy has been destroyed. But what remains? What remains? Go, anyone? Would anyone like
notification
to?
Decree
The
notification to all the
decree,
provinces.
right? The decree in all the provinces throughout the land still remains. And so what does Esther do? She has to again go unsolicited to the king, and she goes to him. And this time we see a very different Esther. The first time she was scared to death. She was fearful for her own life, and she was worried that she would not be received well by the king because it was so fresh in her mind of the situation with Vashti and how Vashti was gotten rid of so quickly. So, but now Esther has kind of grown into her own skin. She's kind of developed in the past couple weeks or days the fact that she is being recognized, respected, and she has the courage to face the king. And so she goes to him a second time, but this time it's for a different kind of an emotional situation. She's not all business and not afraid like she was the first time when she pleaded that she wanted to have two parties for Haman and the king. Now she's pleading for her people. So she falls, it says she in Pasuk 3, she collapses at his feet and cries and begs the king to avert the evil decree. Now, interesting that she has just fallen apart here. Now, is she falling apart because she's so worried about the Jews? Is she falling apart now because she's scared once again that she has to go to the king? And we're not really sure, except that we find that she has to now not play games by inviting and having parties or whatever. She has to get straight to the point. But in Persia and in any kingdom, there was protocol. But as you go before the king, there were things you had to do and there were things you couldn't do or were not supposed to do in the etiquette of the court. And so her falling at the king's feet and crying was an etiquette that was really out of protocol. It was really an unacceptable political move on her part, but it shows us how emotionally tied to her saving the people she was. So after she falls at the king's feet, she begs him to rescind the decree of Haman the Agagite. Now here we see that she identifies Haman as an Agagite, and we know that he is from the Amalekites. Okay, that the king Agag, and that's where the Agagites come from, who was the enemy of the Jews, is identified here. So Haman's identity is clearly stated, and his plot against the Jews is once again brought to the king. Now, the interesting, what I find very interesting is that the king at this point could have said, Esther, I think between all the parties and and Mordecai and all this, I really have kind of had it. I'm done. I've given you basically whatever you wanted. I've saved your life. But he didn't. And I think that this shows us a different kind of personality of the king that we as children in Sunday school didn't really learn. We learned, oh, he's a jolly old king, he's a foolish old king, he doesn't really know what's going on around him, he's oblivious, he's whatever. But in all the texts of Megillat Esther, we find that he is quite a generous man to his queen. We have found that he has been magnanimous, he's been so far patient, and he has been kind to her. So we have to take the text at face value and say, okay, while the king sees that her crying and falling at his feet is out of protocol, she then pulls herself together, stands in front of him and says, when he extends his golden scepter, and she then takes over in the proper protocol, because we see her long-winded speech before the king. she has to say, if it pleases you, and if I found honor in you and favor in you, and I have a proposal that seems proper, if this seems okay with the king. So, she's going on and on and on in front of the king. And then she says, and if I'm pleasing to him, to the king, let a decree be written to countermand this dispatch from Haman. So, and then now she identifies Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and then who is an Agagite, who are both the Agagites. And so the king says to her, all right, Esther, I hear you. And she even continues pasuk 6 in a very, very strong way. She says, for how can I bear to witness the disaster which will befall my people? How can I bear to witness the destruction of my relatives? Now, in the Hebrew, if you look at pasuk 6 in the Hebrew, her words are, when she says, for how can I bear to witness, it's ki eichacha. And if you listen to that, eichacha, what is that that word? Just think a minute. Eichacha. I kind of
Reminds you of Tisha
what?
B'Av, of Tisha B'Av.
Exactly.
Of Tisha B'Av.
Eicha is Lamentations, written by Yirmiyahu, and lamentation. Eicha is the lamenting. She says, ki eichacha, because it's not just how can I bear, but how can I lament? How can I possibly witness this that will be so destructive and so painful for me to watch my people? So she has come from the fearful queen pleading with the king to come to a drinking party, to someone who is very, very sure of what she's going to ask for. So having said that, the king says to her, it says in pasuk 7, Queen Esther and Mordecai, and he says to Mordecai, I have now he says what can happen. She wants the decree to be reprimanded, taken back, but he can't, because we know that once a decree has been issued by under the king's name, it's irrevocable. But what the king does do, he says, behold, I have given the estate to Esther, to you, Esther, and now I'm giving the ring to you, to Mordecai, and what you can do with that ring is that you can write another decree, and you can say whatever it is you need to say in that decree that will help your people. And at this point, he feels that by allowing Mordecai and Esther to write a decree to save the Jewish people, he has basically done everything he can possibly do to help Esther. He really has done everything. And so what happens then, it's then we go to pasuk 9. Pasuk 9 through 14 gets stuck in the middle of the description of what's going on in the text. It really should have been put after the text because it would make more sense if we could everyone mute there's whoever has some children over their or somebody in their background, if you could mute yourself, please. Thank you. What's happened here is the ring is given to Mordecai, and then we hear a lengthy description of the decree and how it's going to be written, where it's going to, how quickly it's going to go out, what it's going to say, what it's going to do, who it's applicable to. And that continues all the way over to 14 through 14, where it says the couriers are dispatched and they go and deliver the new decree. That really should have been taken out and put elsewhere, because let's read the text. I find this very interesting. So it says, let's see, I'm trying to find the pasuk where it says he gave him the ring. Let's see, he's been hanged. The king said, and you may write a new and seal it. Let's see, 8, you seal it with the royal signet. And so right here, the king's name, and you can seal it with the royal signet, this on the ring. So the king secretaries.
In verse 2 is where he really takes off the ring.
Where in King
Verse 2.
So okay, thank you. So verse 2, it says he's taken off the ring and he gives it to Mordecai. And then we don't learn until pasuk 15. Mordecai left the king's presence clad in royal apparel of blue and white, with a large gold crown on his and a robe of fine linen and purple. And then it continues. So it's interesting that the ring is given to him at the very beginning, but he doesn't leave the king's presence until we know that Esther has secured the safety of the people, and that Mordecai will be able to write, and does write, the decree to rescind Haman's decree. Well, not rescind it, but we're going to learn about the text of it, of that decree later. But he writes everything that countermands the Haman's decree, and he doesn't leave as a royal person until all of this is done in pasuk 15. So it's interesting that he gets the ring. It's implied that he's appointed as the king's number 2 guy, but until Esther begs for the safety of her people, gets the okay from the king, and then we have the text about what's going to be included in the decree and where it's going to go. Nothing is going to be told us more about Mordecai until those couriers are dispatched and sent on their way all over the 127 provinces. Then it says, of course, the first people to see the decree are where? Shushan, the capital, because that's where the king is. So they get the notice right away, and it says in pasuk 16, La Yehudi hoita ora v'simcha v'sason vikar. Okay, and this is what we say at Havdalah. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. Now, the Mefarshim identify the four things here as various different things, various reasons that they pick these words, but the connotation that this has is that for the first time, the Jews can emerge and hold up their heads as being proud of being Jews and being recognized as Jews and not being afraid in a foreign country to be Jewish. So they have light and anytime we identify the Jews and light together, it is a certain kind of Jewish recognition of Torah, and perhaps at this point, the Jews understand the significance of their presence in Persia as opposed to their presence in Eretz Yisrael, where they should have been in the first place, and why this whole story has happened to them as almost a near miss, as we say, in Jewish history. So the Jews are happy to receive this proclamation, and the other couriers are on their way to deliver Mordecai's words. Now,
Oh, Rhonda,
Yeah.
excuse me. Something that's always bothered me, and maybe you can answer this. You know,
Sure.
it says that once a decree is made with his signet ring, it can't be undone, so to speak.
right,
However, if he is the king, can't he
Right.
use his signet ring and say, change the law? I would think that as a king, he'd have the power to do that. I don't know if anybody else is bothered by that. Can you explain it?
I will. I do have a little,
Okay.
I have some notes about that. We're gonna talk. Yeah, it's a little strange. That's a little strange. Okay, so what I want to do is go back and give you some thoughts about all that has happened in that chapter. Now, we went through it quickly, but there are some very interesting things that possibly we don't really recognize. So Esther gives the property to Mordecai to manage. I mentioned that it's kind of like an irony. And what we assume here, because of the property being given to Esther, is that there's a vacancy. There's a job vacancy for the king. You know, his right-hand man, Haman, has been killed. And we don't know whether, when it says he's given the property, we don't know whether this is the political property that was, the king's property anyway, that was given to Haman because he was the chief of staff or whatever he was, or whether this was Haman's personal property. So what the Mefarshim tell us, and I'm going to even show you some very interesting things here, is that for all intents and purposes, we could assume that it's both his political and his private property. And I'm going to show you why I believe that's true. Let me see if I can get that. Okay, so okay. When we see at the death of Haman, I just mentioned that there was a vacancy. Esther gets the property. It's interesting that the woman is now able to own property. I find that very interesting that perhaps in Persia, women could own property, or was it just the queen? I'm not really sure, but it is something to be noted that she gets property. But she feels she is still the queen, must live in the palace with the king, and she probably does not know how to manage it or what to do with it, and that's why she hands it over to Mordecai to manage. Maybe he opened a B&B or whatever in the property, who knows what he did with the estate, or maybe he moved into it himself because now he's the number 2 guy. So we're not really sure what happens to that, but Mordecai is in charge. Now, here we find, and I'm going to read you something that I found very interesting. We know that Esther and Ahasuerus have a son. His son is in English Darius, in Hebrew it's Daryavesh. And in the book of Ezra, Ezra writes in chapter 6, verse 1, verse 11. Ezra writes, and here I'm going to read to you. It says, King Darius says, I also issue, when he becomes king, I also issue an order that whoever alters this decree shall have a beam removed from his house, and he shall be hanged from it, and his house confiscated. In the case of the decree by Darius, what happens is that violations of the king's word or violations of the laws of the land any treasonous action, anybody who goes against the king will have, it says, a beam removed from their home, and they will be hung on it. And that gives us a connection between the Haman with the gallows in his backyard on his property, and what happens to Haman, who had become what King Ahasuerus thought was a treasonous person, because he felt on many different levels, different feelings, whether he was out to ravage the queen, whether he was out for the king's job, whether he was doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. The king was enraged and found him not serving the king in his best interest. But his son Daryavesh learns from the incident of Haman being king to make an order that anyone who does anything against the law of the king of the empire is to have this beam removed and the person hung on it. And that indicates to us that the punishment for treason is not only hanging, but confiscation of property. So the king had every right to take Haman's property and give it to whomever he pleased. And now we find that the family, Haman's family, the heirs, do not get the property. It doesn't belong to goes back, reverts back to the king. And the king can choose to whom he wants to give the property to, if he does want to give it to anyone. So now we find that since Mordecai is in taking over the property and managing it, and probably living in it or using it as his personal office, it might come let's think about it. here's where Haman is working and devising all kinds of plans and whatever he's doing. So once he's hung, we might say that Mordecai gets to take over his office, and in that office might have a list of allies of Haman, weapons that are available to the number 2 man as the chief of state, might have a census roll, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. It might have any number of pieces of information that Mordecai can make good use of. And don't forget, Haman probably had to line a lot of pockets in order to get things that he wanted personally. And so this is a great opportunity for Mordecai to clean up shop, so to speak. Now let's take a look at Esther. When she goes to the king unannounced and she pleads for her people, she asks to avert the decree of Haman. She repeats her request to send out another decree to countermand Haman's decree. And of course, she finds that the king is stuck. And he's stuck because he can't revoke that decree. So what he does, of course, we've all just found out, is he gives the ring to to Mordecai. Really what he's doing is giving it to Esther, but for both of them to do what they need to do. And they are able now to write very carefully. They have to craft, it took 3 days to craft this decree, because Mordecai had to make sure that every single word that Haman had written had an equal and opposite action that the Jews could legally perform. You see, he couldn't say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do, the people shouldn't kill the Jews, the people can't, it's now illegal for them to do what the king commanded. He couldn't do any of that. He had to write a whole new decree in which the words of the decree gave legitimacy for the Jews to now protect themselves and to defend themselves against everything that Haman had written. And this was quite a literary task that Mordecai had to take on, and he had to sit there and carefully word it and have all the scribes in every language write it properly before it went out. So her Esther's pleading, her eichacha, her lamenting, and her personal torment of her people being destroyed is now reversed. And she can take a breath of a sigh of relief that she did everything she needed to do in order to save her people. Now, this is not the only story in all of Tanakh that tells us about somebody coming before the king or someone very powerful and pleading for or doing something for the Jewish people. Is there any other story where a Jew is brought before the king and earns the king's esteem and given a ring by the king?
Yosef.
Yes, you're right.
Yosef.
That's correct. Okay, so in many ways, we are hearing echoes of the Yosef story where he's in prison because of being by Potiphar's wife, accusing him of misdeeds. He's thrown into prison, and there he interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker, and they come true. And then eventually the wine steward, the butler, recommends to Paro that Yosef be brought before him to interpret the Paro's dreams. And when he does so, Paro thinks that this is so accurate and such a positive thing. He takes off his signet ring, gives it to Yosef, and makes him number 2. So there's a little bit of a parallel in these stories. In addition to the story sounding very, very similar, some of the wording is very similar. For we know that the brothers come to Egypt because there's a famine in Canaan, and when they come before Yosef, Yosef recognizes them as the brothers, and so we know the whole story there. And what happens is that the words that Esther says before King Achashverosh, the Echacha, the lamenting, listen to what are similar words to what Yehuda says as he stands before his brother Yosef. And he doesn't know that Yosef is his brother, and he's pleading for Benjamin, because Yosef says, I'm going to keep Benjamin here until you come back. Okay. And so Yehuda says, for how can I go back to my father if this boy is not with me, lest I see the disaster, the lamenting that would befall my father? He says, I can't bear to leave my brother with you because it would destroy my father. These are very similar words as Esther says to the king.
Verse 6.
Okay, now Esther says that the disaster that would befall my people would be awful. And so they're both saying very, very similar things. Now, I also have this thought, and some, not all, of the commentators feel that the story in Megillat Esther is like a tikkun olam of the story of Joseph and his brothers. And let's see why. Let's just see if we can see the relationship here. The story of the 2 tribes in the narrative. First is what is the tribe of Esther and Mordecai? You remember? It says it in the beginning. Binyamin, that's right. They are from the tribe of Binyamin. Now, Yosef, let's see if we can do this, if I can get this correct, okay? We're going to take the 2 tribes of Yehuda and Benjamin, okay? Yehuda is the one who, throws Yosef wants to get rid of Yosef. Benjamin wants to save Joseph, And then Yosef saves the tribe of Yehuda. Yehuda is pleading to save Benjamin, while Esther and Mordecai, two Benjamites, are pleading to save Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah are the people who are left in Persia. So the whole thing is, do you see the connection here? Yehuda is pleading to save Benjamin, all right? In the story of, in Paro's story, in the Mitzrayim story. In the Megillat Esther, the Benjamites, the two Benjamites are pleading to save Judah, the people of the kingdom of Judah, who have stayed well too long and not gone home, but they are trying to protect them. And so seems as if the Tikkun Olam is on the tribe of Benjamin, who is trying to save the people of Judah. Now, additionally, we found that King Shaul, remember Shaul did not kill King Agag. And so Shaul was a Benjamite, and he loses the kingdom, the kingship, to David, who's from the tribe of Judah. So you see these two tribes back and forth, one saving each other, one pleading for each other, one rectifying history for each other. So I thought that was a little interesting aside, and I wanted to share that with you. All right. The next thing that we learn is that, well, let's just take one other thing. It's interesting that none of you have said to me, well, how can the king give property and such power to Esther, a woman, in this time of, this is a long time ago, a few thousand years ago. We find that there are other women, other queens, who have just as much power as Esther. Let's think about it. I have two examples to show you. One, who else had tremendous power over a king? Can you name?
God, what was she?
What? Anybody? What other queen
Not
had
Sheba.
Bathsheba? Exactly. She was hell-bent on making sure that her son Shlomo was going to be king. And she goes to Natan the prophet and says, all right, we have to come up with this kind of a scheme. David is aged, he's not capable of making the correct decision, and he promised me that Shlomo would be king. And so she goes and makes sure it happens and that Shlomo is anointed king. Now, that was for good. Now, what about a queen who does evil? And she
Jezebel.
Very good, Shelley. Jezebel. Jezebel is queen in the northern kingdom to Ahab. And what does she do? She kind of soothes Ahab, says, don't worry, honey. I know you're upset because you want Naboth's a property, his garden, his land. I'll take care of it. You go take a nap, and by tomorrow it'll all be taken care of. And she manipulates the whole court scene and buys off the people. Eventually she has Naboth killed, and the property gets taken by the king, and he's all happy about the property. And of course we learn how when they come to kill Jezebel, she's putting on her makeup. Quite the formidable character. So we have two queens in addition to Esther who are strong women, very influential with the king, and provide us with great insight into the power of women, even such a long time ago. Okay, now, I think this is the answer. Well, I'm hoping it'll be the answer to your question, Xenia. Let's see. King Ahasuerus there's a decree, there's a law on the books, whether it's his own law or whether it was a law from someone else, we don't really know, but there is a law on the books that says that any decree that goes out with the king's signature and signet cannot be rescinded. It shows us how certain laws can entrap a person. And here is the best example, because King Ahasuerus would love to take back this order, but he can't. He is trapped by his own law, and he has to succumb to it. And the question that begs to be asked is why he doesn't use his power to take back that law to of not being able to rescind something. And so we find that King Ahasuerus, we assume that he does. The whole story, I think, shows us that he probably didn't know and doesn't know any of the details about the annihilation of the Jews and the punishment that the decree states. And so what he needs to do is, and he allows to be done, is to have Mordecai write something that will show a reversal without reversing. It's very complicated, and we find that Mordecai is skillful enough to do it. But yes, it does show that even the power that the king could possibly have, he himself is subject to his own laws, and that the laws are even more powerful than the king. So, and he becomes diminished in our eyes because he doesn't either do anything about the law or he's incapable of doing something about the law.
In other words, he could not issue another decree, but somebody else can.
No, he or someone else could to write a decree. It couldn't say, I take back.
No, but it
The
could change.
But like I said, it took 3 days for Mordecai to craft the decree to be sent out, because he had to make sure there was no loophole, no point uncountered in the decree that Mordecai wrote that against what Haman wrote. Everything had to be tit for tat. Everything had to be exactly looked at in Haman's decree, so that there would be no way anyone could misinterpret that they could harm the Jews in any way. So there we go. We found out that there was still a tremendous amount to be done by Esther, Mordecai, and the king, and that Esther is now a leading figure in the story. And Mordecai, with his intelligence and his skill, has basically saved the Jews by his decree and becoming the number 2 Secretary of State for the king. And God has now put everybody where they need to be in this big story, or this checkerboard of all the players that God has manipulated from behind the scenes. And in this chapter, we find everybody is now Haman is dead. Mordecai is in charge basically of the empire. The king has willingly relinquished his ring to Mordecai and let the Jews do what they need to do. Esther has pleaded and succeeded on behalf of her people, and all is light and joy in the kingdom. So God, in his infinite wisdom, has manipulated the whole story, and we are now where we are. Now we're going to find out next week what happens as a result of this decree. And I'd also want to show you, next week we will try and take a look at the decree that Mordecai writes so that we will know how skillful he was in writing the decree, and something that is quite interesting. Any questions before we end today?
From the way we started the story with the to me, the reasoning for it is because they did not leave and go to Jerusalem when they should have.
Right.
It seemed that the ultimate outcome that Hashem would have wanted would that they should go to Jerusalem.
Well, he couldn't lift them up and take them. They have to do it on their own free will.
Well, that's true. I know that.
Okay, that's where free will comes in. Maybe God's sad that he gave us free will. All right. Having said that. Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Any comments?